In 1935, the decision was made to give the Philippines its full independence, its first president being elected that same year. This wasn't going to be a case of pack your bags, though. Instead, it was to be a gradual transition with final handover scheduled for July 4th, 1946. Keeping 1935 current events in mind, General Douglas MacArthur, a longtime friend of President Quezon, along with his aide Dwight Eisenhower, arrived that year to advise in the formation of the Philippines military and government, and later took command of the combined U.S. and Filipino forces there. Industrially and economically, it wasn't realistic to expect the Philippines to have a blue water navy capable of repelling the Japanese. Instead, it was hoped that a credible air force working with the U.S. Army Air Force and Navy, working with U.S. Asiatic Fleet, could make an invasion look so costly as to be a deterrent. Failing that, it was hoped a combined Philippine-U.S. Army could resist long enough for U.S. reinforcements to come lift the siege. And what about that? It's important and it needs to be said. Why would the U.S., for generations, commit and even primarily build its fleet to protect the Philippines? Why send a general to help establish its military? Why did the Japanese think they needed to preemptively hit Pearl Harbor to prevent the U.S. from coming to the aid of the Philippines when the U.S. hadn't fought for Poland, China, France, Belgium, Greece, Norway, or England? Why did the U.S. plan for war with Japan and with the U.S. fleet arriving in the Philippines? Why did the U.S. fight the largest naval battle in history for the Philippines? A historian from a colonial country with a colonial mindset that reads maps and dispatches would say something like a U.S. territory or strategic choke point. None of those arguments really hold up, though. In the case of the former, why would it fight for a place that, to be honest, had little materially to offer and is on the other side of the Pacific? Economically, it made no sense. In the later case, the U.S. had no interest in choking the trade of anyone that hadn't attacked them. Live and let live. The answer, and the Japanese knew it, is fraternity. Even before the first Filipinos entered the Naval Academy in 1919, the U.S. military, especially the Navy Department, had nothing but respect for the Filipino people. Many U.S. ships even had Filipino crew members. Still do. The U.S. didn't see the Philippines as a colony to be exploited. Instead, it saw them as brothers that needed to be lifted up until they could defend themselves. In short, despite some occasional disagreements, it is as true then as it is now. If you pick a fight with the Philippines, you pick a fight with the U.S. Given its scarce resources, the Philippines Navy was created as a branch of the Army known as the Offshore Patrol, with its head being U.S. Navy Academy graduate Lieutenant Jose Andrade. Shipwise, since a blue water fleet was out of the question in 1938, it was decided to purchase 2 PT boats from British yards to be delivered in 1939 for evaluation. One larger 65-foot and one smaller 55-foot. The preferred design would then go into production in the Philippines. The hope was that by the spring of 1942, when MacArthur expected the war to start, 36 would be operational, and by 1946, when independence was finalized, 50 would be online. Operationally, they weren't going to be going to sea and taking on the big boys. Instead, the plan was for them to dash out of the numerous lagoons, gulfs, and harbors found on the literally hundreds of islands that make up the Philippines. Working with USPT boats, they would attack the lightly armed landing craft actually bringing troops to the shore and supplying them. Without supplies, the troops that did get ashore could be contained by the Army. Overhead, The Air Force would deal with enemy planes and attack the larger ships at sea. As such, they worked and were stationed closely with the American PT boats at Cavite. The first prototype and flagship of their new captain, Enrique Jurado, was the single wooden 65-foot, 20-ton Luzon. With 3 engines generating 1,800 horsepower, she could get up to 41 knots. Armament was 350 caliber machine guns, 2 torpedoes, and 4 depth chargers. The second prototype was the 55-foot, also wooden, 14-ton Abra. Armament was 250 caliber machine guns, 2 torpedoes, and 2 depth charges. 2 engines produced 2,000 horsepower for a speed of 51 knots. This was the winning design, and local production began in 1941. Only one more. The Philippines' first domestically made ship, a Agusan, was completed by the start of the Pacific War. So, yep, you're looking at the entire Philippine Navy right there. More were under construction, but they would be wiped out in Japanese airstrikes. By late December 1941, the 3 had been joined by the Dande and Baller, the first being a converted motor boat and the later formerly a support boat for the presidential yacht. With little or no air cover and totally outclassed when the war started, there was little the offshore patrol could do offensively. Working with the American PTs, they mostly operated in the Manila Bay area. This included running supplies and personnel to Corregidor and Bataan Peninsula, as well as inserting infiltration teams behind enemy lines, all the while under constant air attack. While doing so, on February 2, 1942, Dande was bombed and sunk. With Bataan being overrun and with engine problems, on April 9th, Abra was scuttled at Nevados while the remaining 3 tried to escape. They didn't get far, as that same day they ran into 2 Japanese destroyers blockading the harbor and gallantly attacked. Hit badly, Luzon was scuttled, while the Agusan and Balar returned to port, where the damaged Agusan was scuttled. The last, Baller, survived and was captured by the Japanese. With their ships gone, many of the crews disappeared into the jungle, where they joined the guerrilla groups that continued to fight throughout the war. Post-war, on July 4th, 1946, the U.S. kept its promise and the Philippines celebrated its independence, the Philippines Navy and Marines being established soon after.